They say life shifts not with thunder, but with a hush, and 6 months later, I still carry that afternoon inside me like a held breath, the ceiling fan's low hum stitching the minutes together, sunlight stretching across the floor as if the house itself were pausing to listen, and I remember thinking I was alone, certain of it, until I wasn't. Until he saw me, not a passing glance, not an accidental look, but a seeing that felt complete, unguarded and irrevocably. Something in me tilted. I didn't hear him enter, only the soft complaint of the door and the silence that followed. And when our eyes met, there was confusion there, yes, but also a recognition I couldn't name. And neither of us spoke, because the moment had weight and language felt clumsy. And ever since I've asked myself whether I forgot to close the door, or whether some quieter, braver part of me wanted to be seen. Because once you re-reflected in someone else's gaze like that, there's no return to who you were before. And I'll tell you everything. But first let me say this, I senti a story about scandal so much as it is about absence, about what grows in the spaces we pretend aren't empty. David and I used to be in love, or I thought we were, and in the beginning there was warmth and effort, and those nights when he looked at me like I was the only woman on earth. But over time, the spark thinned into smoke, always fading, until we became two people sharing a house rather than a life, his work pulling him away, his presence thinning even when he was home, nodding at the right places, speaking words that sounded practiced and hollow. And into that quiet stepped Elanot, a relative, not a forbidden tie, just a young man who rented the spare room when he moved to the city for school. Quiet and careful, carrying a kind of gravity in his eyes that suggested he'd learned early how to be self-contained. When I met him, he was 17 and guarded, and by the time he turned 20, he was taller, steadier, still reserved, but sharper around the edges, and something about him began to change. Not in a way that was obvious or loud, just a subtle attentiveness, a lingering curiosity, and I noticed it the way you notice weather shifting before the rain falls. There was a morning when I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee in jeans and a loose blouse, and he paused a second too long. Smiled, passed close enough that my perfume seemed to trail after him, and I told myself it was nothing, coincidence or imagination. But once you see a pattern, it's hard to unsee the offers to help. The glances lifted when I entered a room, the laughter that came easily, even at jokes that weren't especially funny. But not flirtation exactly, more like a softness that unsettled me, because it made me feel real after so long of feeling invisible. And our dinners became quieter, often just the two of us at the table, while David worked late or traveled, our conversations skimming the surface while something steadier hummed beneath. And sometimes the words ran out and we sat in silence that wasn't empty at all. And I hated myself for wanting him to look and for feeling my breath hitch when he did, telling myself loneliness plays tricks. That attention can masquerade as affection, and yet asking why him never brought an answer I liked. The day it happened, the rain came down thick and heavy, muffling the world. David gone again with a distracted goodbye. The house hollow with that dull ache, that tea sharp enough to demand action, but persistent enough to wear you thin. and I drifted upstairs without a plan. Closing the bedroom door, thinking I did sitting on the edge of the bed with my thoughts circling places I hadn't visited in years, letting my hands trace familiar ground, not out of lust, but out of longing. A need to remember I still existed beneath the roles I'd learned to play. And for a few moments I imagined warmth, presence, a gaze that didn't slide past me. And then the presence wasn't imagined at all. I turned, and there he was in the doorway, frozen, eyes wide, with something that wasn't shock so much as startled recognition. And time stretched thin and strange as I gathered myself to slowly, words failing, and before either of us could speak, he turned and left, not hurried, not panicked. Just gone, leaving a silence so loud it pressed against my ears, and I stayed there convincing myself it hadn't happened until the memory refused to fade and that night's sleep wouldn't come, because beneath the shame curled a secret heat I wasn't ready to name. The days after were worse in their quiet, my avoiding him while he appeared more often, careful, kind, attentive, the look in his eyes. Unchanged, and at night when David slept with his back turned, my thoughts wandered places I didn't invite them, but dreams slipping in, where resolve failed and I changed small things, softer fabrics, a button undone, excuses. I told myself about feeling good for me while noticing the way Eli's voice had deepened, the way his presence filled a room, hating that my body responded before my mind could catch up. Telling myself nothing had happened while knowing something had, because being seen can be intoxicating when you've gone so long without it. It escalated in inches, not miles, arms. Brushing in the kitchen, a touch that lingered a fraction longer than necessary, pauses, heavy with unsaid things. Until one evening our hands met, reaching for the same thing, and we froze, eyes locking, the air between us charged, and I should have laughed and stepped back but didn't, and later when I found his sketchbook open on the desk and saw myself there, not idealized, not crude, just captured in a quiet moment of thought, it felt like standing in front of a mirror that reflected a truer version of me, and when I confronted him, his denial was gentle and transparent, fear flickering because I'd seen what he hadn't meant to show. And that night when he knocked softly and stood in the doorway, apologizing, admitting he couldn't forget what he'd seen, his words, barely a whisper, I wanted to run and also to stay, and I did the latter, not moving because the line had already blurred inside me. Another stormy night, David gone, the house holding its breath again. Eli said he should move out because it wasn't right, and the idea hollowed me. My plea surprised us both. And when I reached for his arm and he stepped into the embrace, it lasted too long. Bodies fitting with an ease that frightened me. And when we pulled back only inches apart, the choice seemed already made by the silence, and whether it was a kiss or merely the promise of one matters less than the truth that in that suspended moment the world narrowed to heat and breath and the feeling of being alive, and afterward the silence returned sharper, glassy, cutting, and we avoided each other as if distance could undo what had been veiled at, of tense could indent be felt. David noticed something off, I lied easily. The ease of it alarming me more than anything else, because it meant I'd crossed into someone I didn't recognize, and nights found me staring at the ceiling, asking what I'd in, and missing the electricity even as guilt settled heavy in my chest, mourning the woman I thought I was and wondering when she slipped away. Eventually, Eli left to stay elsewhere, saying he needed space, and the house grew quieter, still a ringing quiet that felt like punishment, and David nodded when I asked for time, his detachment hurting in its own way. And I keep hoping distance will dull the dreams and reorder the world, that time will tuck this into a corner I won't visit, but it hasn't. Because desire doesn't arrive politely or ask if it fits your life. It comes quietly and wild, wearing the face of safety and attention, daring you to pretend you don't feel it. And once you do, even for a moment, you don't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Her eyes holding too much, her silence too loud. And I'm not telling this for forgiveness or pity, only because truth has weight, and I needed someone to hear it, to know that sometimes the fire you never meant to light burns in the space where comfort used to live, and living with that knowledge changes everything.